A malevolent smirk spreads across Judge William Hampton's face as he stares down at the teenage boy standing alone before his bench. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 7B cast harsh shadows across the judge's weathered features, highlighting the contempt in his eyes. Marcus Chen grips his leather briefcase, refusing to break eye contact with the man who thinks this will be an easy victory. You expect me to believe a child can argue this case? Where is your lawyer, boy? Hampton drawls, his voice dripping with mockery. The assembled lawyers and clerks snicker, but Marcus remains steady. They see a naive 15-year-old who should be in school. They have no idea that behind his quiet demeanor lies a legal mind sharper than anyone in this courthouse. For Marcus, this isn't just about saving his grandmother's house from a predatory corporation. In the 2 months since her suspicious death, he's uncovered a pattern in Hampton's rulings that points to decades of corruption. His grandmother taught him that the law is like chess. Every move must be calculated, every piece positioned with purpose. Now he'll use those lessons to expose the truth, even if it costs him everything. But powerful people will do anything to keep their secrets buried. As Marcus digs deeper, dark forces move against him. Soon he'll have to decide, walk away and live, or risk it all to bring down a corrupt empire built on the backs of innocent families. Before we start this video, buckle up, get ready and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. The ancient grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times as Marcus Chen made his final move. His fingers lingered on the white queen for a moment before releasing it, knowing this would be their last game together. Across the polished mahogany chess and table, his grandmother's eyes sparkled with pride and something else, a shadow of concern that had been growing deeper over the past few weeks. "Checkmate in 3, Marcus said quietly, his voice barely rising above the gentle patter of rain against the library windows. The room smelled of old leather bindings and his grandmother's jasmine tea, a scent that had become synonymous with their evening ritual. Eleanor Chen leaned forward, her silver hair catching the warm light from the antique desk lamp. She studied the board intently, then sat back with a soft laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Beautiful setup with the knight sacrifice. You saw 6 moves ahead, minimum 7, Marcus admitted, allowing himself a small smile. At 15, he stood nearly a foot taller than his grandmother now, but in this room, surrounded by towering shelves of law books and case files, he still felt like the wide-eyed child who had first learned to play at her knee. Eleanor rose slowly from her chair, walking to one of the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that lined the walls of their Victorian home's library. Her hand trailed along the spines of leather-bound volumes, stopping at a thick tome on constitutional law. Chess and law share the same fundamental truth, Marcus. Every move must serve a greater strategy. Marcus began resetting the pieces, each one finding its place with practiced precision. "That's why you taught me both. I taught you because your mind was made for them." Eleanor pulled the book from the shelf, holding it with a reverence Marcus had always admired. "The law isn't just rules and precedents. It's a living thing, constantly evolving. Like chess, it requires you to see patterns others miss." She returned to the table, placing the book beside the chessboard. Marcus noticed her hands trembling slightly, something that had been happening more frequently lately. "Grandmother, are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," she said, waving off his concern. "But there's something we need to discuss." She opened the book, revealing a hidden compartment cut into its pages. Inside lay a USB drive and a sealed envelope. Marcus felt his chest tighten. His grandmother had been a law professor for 30 years before retiring, and she'd never been one for dramatics. "What's going on?" "There are people who believe the law is their personal instrument," she said, her voice hardening. "They twist it to serve their own ends, counting on the fact that most won't look closely enough to see the truth." She pushed the items toward him. "If anything happens to me, these contain everything you need to know." "Happens to you?" "Grandmother, you're scaring me." Eleanor reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. Her grip was firm despite the tremors. "I've taught you everything I could, Marcus. Your mind sees connections others don't. You understand strategy in a way that goes beyond chess or law. You'll need that in the days ahead. Before Marcus could press further, she grimaced and pressed a hand to her temple. I think I need to lie down. We'll talk more tomorrow. Marcus helped her up the stairs to her bedroom, his mind racing with questions. As he turned to leave, she called out to him one last time. Remember, Marcus, in chess, as in law, the quiet moves are often the most powerful. Those were the last words she ever spoke to him. The next morning, Marcus found her in her bed, peaceful but lifeless. The official cause of death was listed as a stroke, but the USB drive and letter hidden in the law book told a different story. 2 months later, Marcus sat alone in the library, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and case files. The chess table stood empty, the pieces untouched since their final game. His grandmother's warning echoed in his mind as he reviewed the notice of eviction for the 3rd time. According to the papers, their home now belonged to Meridian Development Corporation, a company Marcus had never heard of until they produced a deed signed by his grandmother 6 months before her death. But Eleanor Chen had been meticulous about her records, and Marcus knew every detail of their home's ownership. The deed was a forgery, but proving it would require navigating a legal system that seemed designed to swallow the truth. The law books that lined the walls were no longer just his grandmother's legacy, they were his armor. For the past 2 months, he'd immersed himself in their pages, absorbing statutes and precedents with the same intensity he'd once applied to chess strategies. His classmates at Lincoln High thought he'd lost his mind, burying himself in legal texts instead of mourning normally. The school counselor had suggested grief counseling. None of them understood that this was his way of fighting back. Marcus pulled out his grandmother's letter, reading it again, although he'd memorized every word. The USB drive had contained hundreds of files documenting a pattern of suspicious property transfers, all involving the same judge and development company. Eleanor had been building a case, but she died before she could bring it to light. Now they were coming for her house, and Marcus was the only one left to stop them. He'd tried reaching out to lawyers, but none would take the case against Judge William Hampton. The man's reputation for crushing opponents in court was legendary, and few attorneys were willing to risk their careers. Tomorrow morning, Marcus would walk into courtroom 7B alone. No lawyer, no legal guardian, just a 15-year-old, armed with his grandmother's research and a mind that could see 7 moves ahead. The system would try to dismiss him as a grieving child in over his head. They would expect him to break down, to give up and walk away. But Marcus Chen had learned strategy from a grandmaster, both in chess and in law. As he gathered his documents and placed them carefully in his grandmother's old leather briefcase, he allowed himself a small smile. They thought this would be an easy victory. They had no idea they were already in check. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its deep tones echoing through the empty house. Marcus closed the last law book and stood, his shadow stretching long across the library floor. Tomorrow, he would step into a courtroom and face down a corrupt judge and his corporate allies. They would mock him, underestimate him, try to intimidate him into silence. But Marcus had one advantage they couldn't possibly understand. While they saw the law as a weapon to wield against the weak, he saw it as his grandmother had taught him to see chess, a perfect pattern of moves and countermoves, where justice could emerge from the most unexpected places. He was ready to play the game they never saw coming. Marcus stared at the thick manila envelope that had just been delivered, his heart pounding against his ribs. The return address belonged to Meridian Development Corporation, the company trying to seize his home. Inside, he found a stack of legal documents that made his blood run cold. The will they presented was perfect. Every signature, every stamp, every legal formality was flawless. According to these papers, his grandmother had not only signed over their house to Meridian, but had also explicitly disinherited Marcus. The document claimed she had made this decision 6 months before her death, citing concerns about his mental stability and ability to manage the property. Marcus spread the papers across the library desk, comparing them to his grandmother's genuine documents. The signatures were identical, down to the slight upward curve of the final N in Chen. Too identical. He pulled out his grandmother's legal files from the past year, laying them out chronologically. A pattern emerged that made his chest titan. On the date the will was supposedly signed, Eleanor Chen had been giving a guest lecture at Stanford Law School. Marcus had the photos on his phone, pictures of them together in California, hundreds of miles from where this will claimed she had been. It was the kind of detail most people would miss, but his grandmother had taught him of inconsistencies. He pulled up his laptop, accessing the digital copies of his grandmother's research. The USB drive she had hidden contained of meticulously organized evidence, each piece building towards something larger. Marcus had spent weeks decoding her system, understanding why she had arranged the information the way she had. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Through the frosted glass, he could make out the shape of Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor, who had been checking on him regularly since his grandmother's death. Marcus quickly gathered the documents, sliding them into his briefcase before opening the door. "I brought you some dinner, mijo," Mrs. Rodriguez said, holding out a covered dish that smelled of her famous enchiladas. Her eyes were warm with concern. "You need to eat, especially now." Marcus accepted the dish gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I was actually about to make something." The lie came easily, even though they both knew he had been losing himself in legal documents instead of taking care of basic necessities. She peered past him into the house, taking in the stacks of papers and law books. "Marcus, are you sure you do not want me to call my nephew? He is a lawyer in Sacramento, very good with family law." Marcus shook his head. "I appreciate it, but I need to handle this myself." He managed a small smile. "Grandmother always said, the best way to understand something is to do it yourself." Mrs. Rodriguez sighed, reaching up to pat his cheek. "She would be proud of you, but she would also want you to take care of yourself. Promise me you will eat." After she left, Marcus returned to the library, setting the enchiladas aside as he dove back into his grandmother's files. The fake will was just the beginning. Eleanor's research had uncovered a pattern of similar cases, all involving Meridian development and all passing through Judge Hampton's courtroom. Marcus pulled up the property records for the last 5 years. In each case, elderly homeowners had supposedly signed over their properties to Meridian, often just months before their deaths. The deeds were always perfect, the paperwork immaculate, too perfect, like his grandmother's forged will. He opened a new document, starting to map out the connections. His grandmother had taught him to approach legal research like a chess game, seeing how each piece related to the others. As he worked, a clear pattern emerged. Meridian targeted specific properties, always in areas slated for redevelopment. They moved like a knight on a chessboard, indirect but devastating. The sound of breaking glass shattered his concentration. Marcus froze, listening intently as footsteps moved through the kitchen. Someone was in the house. He quickly saved his work to the cloud, something his grandmother had insisted on, then closed his laptop quietly. The intruder was moving methodically, opening drawers and cabinets. They were looking for something. Marcus slipped behind one of the tall bookshelves, his heart thundering in his ears. Through a gap in the books, he could see a figure in black entering the library. The man went straight to his grandmother's desk, pulling out drawers and rifling through papers. He was professional, wearing gloves and moving with purpose. This was not a random burglary. Marcus held his breath as the intruder approached the shelf where the constitutional law book had hidden the USB drive. A car alarm went off outside, startling both Marcus and the intruder. The man cursed softly, then spoke into what seemed to be a concealed radio. "Nothing here. The old lady must have kept it somewhere else." Marcus waited until he heard the back door close before moving. He checked the house carefully, noting everything that had been disturbed. The intruder had known what he was looking for, focusing on his grandmother's office and the library. They were after her research. Returning to the library, Marcus packed his most crucial documents into the briefcase. He could not stay here tonight. The break-in confirmed what his grandmother's warning had suggested. There were people who would go to any length to keep their secrets buried. He called Mrs. Rodriguez, asking if he could stay the night. She agreed immediately, her voice thick with concern. As he packed a small bag, Marcus's mind raced with implications. The fake will, the break-in, his grandmother's death, all pieces of a larger game. Tomorrow morning, he would face Judge Hampton in court. The elderly judge was known for his sharp tongue and zero tolerance for what he called time wasters. He would expect Marcus to crumble under questioning, to flee from the courtroom in tears like so many others before him. But Marcus had spent his life learning from a master strategist. His grandmother had taught him that in both chess and law, the key to victory was seeing the whole board while your opponent focused on individual for physical evidence, not realizing that the most dangerous weapon was already safely stored in Marcus's mind. He took one last look around the library before leaving, his eyes lingering on the chess table where he and his grandmother had played their final game. The pieces still stood exactly as they had been that night, the white queen positioned for the killing move they never got to complete. Marcus picked up the queen, slipping it into his pocket. Tomorrow, he would walk into court alone, armed with nothing but his grandmother's teachings and his own brilliant mind. They thought they were facing a helpless teenager. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. As he locked the front door, Marcus noticed a black sedan parked across the street, its engine idling. He walked calmly to Mrs. Rodriguez's house, never letting on that he had spotted them. Let them watch. Let them think they had him scared and running. The game was just beginning, and Marcus Chen intended to play it all the way to checkmate. The marble halls of the courthouse echoed with Marcus's footsteps as he made his way to courtroom 7B. His grandmother's leather briefcase felt heavy in his hand, weighted with evidence that could expose decades of corruption. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Several attorneys lounging near the courtroom doors fell silent as Marcus approached. He caught fragments of their whispered conversations. "That's the Chen kid, and Hampton will destroy him." Marcus kept his face neutral, remembering his grandmother's advice about courthouse dynamics. Every hallway was a chessboard, every interaction a calculated move. Inside the courtroom, Marcus took his place at the plaintiff's table alone. The defense table across the aisle was crowded with Meridian Development's legal team, led by Richard Whitman, a man whose silver hair and tailored suit screamed old money and influence. Whitman barely glanced at Marcus, too busy consulting with his junior associates. The gallery behind them filled quickly. Word had spread about the teenage boy challenging Judge Hampton, and the regular courthouse crowd wasn't about to miss the show. Marcus could feel their stares boring into his back as he organized his documents with methodical precision. All rise. The Honorable Judge William Hampton presiding. Judge Hampton swept into the courtroom, his black robes billowing behind him. He was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps in his early 60s, with sharp features and cold blue eyes that seemed to dissect everything they landed on. He took his seat and immediately fixed his gaze on Marcus. "I see we have a rather unusual situation today," Hampton said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of old Boston money. "Young man, where is your legal representation?" Marcus stood, his voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, I will be representing myself in this matter." A ripple of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Hampton's mouth twisted into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You understand this is not some high school mock trial, boy. This is a court of law." "Yes, Your Honor. I am well aware of the serious nature of these proceedings." Hampton leaned forward. "And you are?" "How old?" 15, Your Honor. However, according to Connecticut General Statutes, Section 45A-122, I have the right to challenge matters involving my inheritance. Furthermore, under the doctrine established in Regalt, minors are entitled to due process protections. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. Across the aisle, Whitman shifted in his chair, studying Marcus with new interest. "Very well," Hampton said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Mr. Whitman, please present your case." Whitman rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of property transfer. We have a properly executed deed and will showing that Eleanor Chen transferred her property to Meridian Development Corporation 6 months before her death. The documents have been verified by multiple experts." Marcus listened carefully as Whitman presented the forged documents, noting every detail that contradicted his grandmother's research. When Whitman finished, Hampton turned to Marcus with an expression that suggested he was already bored. "Your response, Mr. Chen." Marcus stood, removing his grandmother's chess queen from his pocket and placing it on the table before him. The small gesture caught Hampton's attention. Exactly as intended. "Your Honor, I intend to prove that these documents are forgeries, part of a larger pattern of fraud involving multiple properties in New Haven County. On the date this will was supposedly signed, my grandmother was giving a lecture at Stanford Law School." He produced the photographs and documentation of Eleanor's California trip. Hampton's face remained impassive, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around his eye. "I have identified 12 similar cases in the past 3 years where elderly homeowners purportedly reportedly transferred their properties to Meridian Development shortly before their deaths. In each case, the signatures were verified by the same notary, who, interestingly, died in a car accident last year. Whitman surged to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. These unsubstantiated conspiracies have no bearing on the matter at hand." "Sustained," Hampton snapped. "Mr. Chen, unless you have concrete evidence relating specifically to your grandmother's property, I suggest you reconsider wasting this court's time." Marcus met the judge's gaze steadily. "Your Honor, I have evidence that my grandmother was investigating these property transfers before her death. She discovered a pattern of suspicious rulings that always benefited Meridian Development." The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees. Hampton's face hardened into a mask of judicial authority. "That's enough, Mr. Chen. You are dangerously close to contempt." "Your Honor, if I may direct the court's attention to Exhibit C," Marcus said, pulling out a document from his briefcase. "This is a map showing all properties acquired by Meridian Development through probate court in the past 5 years. When overlaid with the city's redevelopment plans, a clear pattern emerges." He approached the bench with the map, aware of every eye in the courtroom following his movements. Hampton had no choice but to accept the document, though his hands betrayed a slight tremor as he examined it. "And what exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Chen?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor. I'm presenting evidence that my grandmother's signature was forged on documents dated to a time when she was provably elsewhere. Whether this forgery is connected to the larger pattern of suspicious property transfers is a matter for further investigation." Marcus returned to his table, picking up the chess queen and rolling it between his fingers. The move was calculated, drawing Hampton's attention to the piece. According to his grandmother's notes, the judge had been a competitive chess player in his youth. "Your Honor," Whitman interjected smoothly, "regardless of Mr. Chen's theories, the fact remains that we have properly executed documents. The burden of proof lies with him to demonstrate fraud, not merely imply it." Hampton seized the lifeline Whitman offered. "Indeed, Mr. Chen, do you have any actual evidence of forgery beyond your grandmother's travel records?" "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus pulled out another document. "I would like to enter into evidence this analysis of the ink used in the contested will. The chemical composition includes a particular polymer that was not manufactured until 3 months ago. A sharp intake of breath from the gallery accompanied this revelation." Whitman's face darkened as he conferred hurriedly with his team. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "I have subpoenaed records from Meridian Development showing unusual payments to a shell company registered to the deceased notary who verified these documents." Hampton's gavel cracked against the bench. "That's enough. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow morning. Mr. Chen, I strongly suggest you retain proper legal counsel before continuing with these serious allegations." As the courtroom emptied, Marcus caught Hampton and Whitman exchanging significant looks. He packed his briefcase carefully, noting the 2 men in dark suits who had slipped into the gallery during his presentation. Outside the courthouse, Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a single text message. First move complete. His grandmother had taught him that the opening game was crucial, but it was the middle game where matches were truly won or lost. The black sedan from the previous night was parked across the street. Marcus walked past it without hurrying, feeling their eyes on him. Let them watch, let them worry. The real evidence, the proof that would bring down their entire operation, was still safely hidden. His phone buzzed with a reply. "Package received, proceeding as planned." Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he headed home. Today had been about establishing position, about letting his opponents see just enough to make them nervous. Tomorrow would be about forcing them to make mistakes. The chess queen was still warm in his pocket, a reminder of everything his grandmother had taught him about strategy and patience. The game was far from over, but the pieces were finally in motion. The courthouse archives smelled of dust and forgotten secrets as Marcus pored over stacks of case files. He had arrived the moment the building opened, using his grandmother's research to request specific records from the past 5 years. The young clerk, Sarah Martinez, watched him with growing curiosity as he methodically built his case. "You really know what you're looking for," she said. Her brown eyes were sharp with intelligence, and Marcus sensed she had noticed things herself during her time in the courthouse. "Pattern recognition," Marcus replied, carefully documenting a series of property transfers. "My grandmother taught me to look for connections others might miss." Sarah glanced around the empty archive room before lowering her voice. "I have been tracking similar cases. Properties belonging to elderly residents suddenly transferring to corporations, always passing through Judge Hampton's court. Marcus looked up from his work, studying her face. How long have you been keeping records? 2 years. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, but the numbers did not add up. She pulled a small notebook from her desk drawer. Every case follows the same pattern. The owner dies or becomes incapacitated. Documents appear showing they transferred their property months earlier, and Judge Hampton fast-tracks the proceedings. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Here was an unexpected ally, someone else who had seen the corruption hiding in plain sight. Would you be willing to testify about what you have observed? Sarah hesitated, fear flickering across her features. These people are powerful, Marcus. Last year, another clerk started asking questions. She was fired for misconduct, and now she cannot find work anywhere in the state. I understand if you cannot help, Marcus said softly, but everything you have documented could help expose what they are doing. Sarah looked at her notebook, then back at Marcus. Your grandmother, she was investigating this too, was she not? Marcus nodded, the grief still fresh. She left me evidence, but they broke into our house trying to find it. They do not know I already moved everything to a secure location. Give me until tomorrow, Sarah said, squaring her shoulders. I need to make copies of everything I have documented. If we are going to do this, we need to be thorough. For the next several hours, Marcus immersed himself in court records, building a timeline of suspicious rulings. Each case reinforced the pattern, revealing how Judge Hampton had systematically helped Meridian Development acquire prime real estate through fraudulent means. The sound of footsteps made them both look up. Richard Whitman stood in the doorway, his expensive suit out of place among the dusty archive. Quite the dedicated researcher, are not you, Mr. Chen? Marcus kept his face neutral as he gathered his notes. Just exercising my right to review public records, Mr. Whitman. Indeed. Whitman's smile never reached his eyes. I hope you understand that continuing down this path could have serious consequences for everyone involved. His gaze shifted meaningfully to Sarah. Are you threatening us, Mr. Whitman? Marcus asked, letting just enough edge enter his voice to make the lawyer uncomfortable. Merely offering friendly advice. A young man like yourself has his whole future ahead of him. It would be a shame to jeopardize that over misplaced suspicions. Marcus stood, matching Whitman's cold smile. My grandmother always said that the truth reveals itself through patterns. The more you try to hide something, the more obvious the pattern becomes. Whitman's facade cracked slightly. Your grandmother should have focused on teaching you self-preservation instead of chess metaphors. She might still be alive if she had. The implied threat hung in the air like poison. Marcus felt Sarah tense beside him, but he maintained his composure. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Whitman. I will give it all the consideration it deserves. After Whitman left, Sarah's hands were shaking as she organized her files. They know we are gathering evidence. What if they come after us, like they did your grandmother? That is why we need to be smarter than they expect, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. He showed her the app he had been running during Whitman's visit. Every word recorded and automatically uploaded to secure cloud storage. Sarah's eyes widened. You knew he would come. Chess taught me to think several moves ahead. Whitman just gave us evidence of witness intimidation. Now we need to make sure the rest of our documentation is protected. They worked through lunch, scanning crucial documents and encrypting the files. Sarah's records provided vital corroboration of the pattern Marcus had discovered. Together, they built a comprehensive timeline showing how Judge Hampton had systematically corrupted the legal process. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the archive floor, Sarah handed Marcus a USB drive. Everything I have documented is here. Bank records showing suspicious payments, property transfers that violated procedure, cases where evidence mysteriously disappeared. Marcus tucked the drive into his inner pocket. Are you sure about this? Once we move forward, there is no going back. Sarah squared her shoulders. What they are doing violates everything the law stands for. A noise in the hallway made them both freeze, but it was just another clerk passing by. Marcus realized they had stayed too long. We should go separately to avoid attention. Be careful, Marcus, Sarah said as she gathered her things. These people have already killed once to protect their secrets. Marcus waited 10 minutes after Sarah left before leaving the archives. The setting sun cast long shadows shadows through the courthouse windows, making every corner seem menacing. He kept his hand on his phone, ready to record if anyone approached him. Outside, the same black sedan was parked across the street. Marcus walked in the opposite direction, taking a circuitous route home. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. In chess, sometimes the best attack is to make your opponent think they have you trapped. When he finally reached home, Marcus found a plain envelope had been slipped under his door. Inside was a single chess piece, a black king broken in half. The message was clear, but they did not understand who they were dealing with. Marcus placed the broken piece on his grandmother's chessboard. Tomorrow, he would present his evidence in court. Let them think they had him scared. Let them believe their threats had worked. The real game was just beginning, and Marcus Chen had learned from the best how to turn an opponent's confidence into their downfall. Morning light filtered through the library windows as Marcus reviewed his evidence for the 100th time. The patterns were undeniable now, each document connecting to form a web of corruption that stretched back decades. Sarah's files had provided the missing pieces, revealing how Judge Hampton and Meridian Development had systematically targeted vulnerable homeowners. Marcus spread the documents across his grandmother's desk, arranging them chronologically. The earliest case dated back to 2005, when Hampton had first taken the bench. A family had lost their historic brownstone after the owner, a widowed professor, supposedly signed it over to Meridian months before dying of a heart attack. The pattern repeated with disturbing regularity. Elderly homeowners in prime locations would suddenly transfer their properties to Meridian, often just before their deaths or severe health incidents. The documentation was always perfect, the signatures verified by now deceased notaries. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. Principal Stevens stood on the porch, his face grave. "Marcus, we need to discuss your attendance." Marcus let him in, knowing this confrontation had been coming. He had missed 2 weeks of classes while building his case. "Your teachers are concerned," Stephen said, settling into an armchair. "I understand you are dealing with a difficult situation, but your education has to come first." "With all due respect, sir, this is my education." Marcus gestured to the legal documents covering the desk. "My grandmother taught constitutional law for 30 years. She would want me to fight this." Stevens picked up one of the court files, frowning as he scanned it. "Marcus, these allegations against Judge Hampton are serious. He is a respected member of the judiciary. Respect does not make him innocent," Marcus replied, pulling out Sarah's records. "Look at these property transfers. Every case follows the same pattern." The principal studied the documents, his expression growing. "Trouble. Even if what you are saying is true, this is not your responsibility. You are 15. You should be focused on school, on your future." "This is my future," Marcus said quietly. "If I do not stop them, they will keep stealing from people who cannot defend themselves." Stevens set down the files with a heavy sigh. "I cannot keep making exceptions, Marcus. Either return to classes Monday, or I will have to begin truancy proceedings." After the principal left, Marcus sat at the chess table, absently moving pieces as he considered his options. His grandmother's voice seemed to whisper from the worn wood. "Sometimes you must sacrifice a piece to win the game." His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Emergency. Meet me at Carter's Coffee in 20 minutes." The small cafe was nearly empty when Marcus arrived. Sarah sat in a corner booth, her face pale. "They know about the records I copied. Someone broke into my desk last night." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Did they find anything?" "No. I keep everything important at home now." She clutched her coffee cup with trembling hands. "But this morning, Judge Hampton called me into his chambers. He knows we are working together." "What did he say?" "He reminded me that my mother's disability hearing is next month. Said he would hate to see her lose her benefits over a clerical error." Sarah's voice cracked. "Marcus, I cannot risk her care. She depends on those payments." Marcus reached across the table. "You have done more than enough already." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. "I want to help, but your mother comes first," Marcus finished. "We knew they would play dirty. I can use that against them." Back home, Marcus began reorganizing his evidence. Without Sarah's direct testimony, he would need to find another way to prove the pattern of corruption. The USB drive she had given him still contained crucial documents, but presented Planting them would be trickier now. His phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Mr. Chen." Richard Whitman's smooth voice oozed false concern. "I heard about your attendance issues. Such a shame if your promising academic career were derailed by these unfortunate distractions." Marcus kept his voice steady. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Whitman. Was there something specific you wanted to discuss?" "We are prepared to be generous, Marcus. A full scholarship to any prep school of your choice. Think of your future." "My future is exactly what I'm thinking about," Marcus replied. "And my grandmother taught me that some things are worth more than money." Whitman's tone hardened. "Do not be foolish, boy. You have no idea what you are dealing with." "Actually, I do. Would you like me to tell you exactly how much Judge Hampton has received in offshore payments for each favorable ruling? Or should we discuss the convenient accidents that seem to happen to anyone who questions your activities?" The line went silent for a moment. When Whitman spoke again, all pretense of friendliness was gone. "You are playing a very dangerous game, Mr. Chen." "No, Mr. Whitman, I am winning a dangerous game. Check your email." Marcus ended the call and sent the encrypted files, each one showing a clear connection between Hampton's rulings and Meridian's property acquisitions. Let them sweat, wondering how much evidence he really had. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his history teacher. "Assignment 3 weeks overdue. 0 credit if not submitted by Friday." Marcus looked at his grandmother's chessboard, remembering how she had taught him to think several moves ahead. He could not fight this battle on all fronts. Something had to give. He opened his laptop and began typing his withdrawal from Lincoln High. Principal Stevens would receive it in the morning. His education would continue, just not in the way they expected. The grandfather clock struck midnight as Marcus finished preparing for tomorrow's court appearance. Without Sarah's testimony, he would need to be perfect in his presentation of evidence. One mistake, one oversight, and Hampton would shut him down. But Marcus had learned from the best how to turn an opponent's strengths into weaknesses. They thought their threats and intimidation had weakened his position. Instead, each move they made only proved his case more clearly. He placed his grandmother's white queen on the chessboard, positioning it for an attack they would never see coming. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Marcus Chen was ready to show them exactly what kind of game they were really playing. The sound of shattering glass jolted Marcus awake. He lay perfectly still in the darkness, listening to multiple footsteps moving through the house. This was not like the previous break-in. These men were not trying to be subtle. Marcus slipped out of bed, grabbing his backup drive and phone. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "Always have an escape route planned." He eased open his bedroom window as heavy boots climbed the stairs. The roof of the porch was just below his window. Marcus climbed out carefully, years of parkour practice making his movements silent. Behind him, his bedroom door crashed open. "Clear," a gruff voice called. "Kid must be downstairs." Marcus edged along the porch roof, reaching the old oak tree that had been his escape route since childhood. As he began climbing down, light flooded his bedroom. He heard angry voices when they discovered he was gone. His feet touched the ground. Just as flashlight beams swept the backyard, Marcus pressed himself against the tree trunk, barely breathing. 2 men in dark clothing prowled the yard, their movements professional and purposeful. "Find him," a familiar voice ordered. Richard Whitman stepped into view, his expensive suit incongruous in the pre-dawn darkness. "That little brat has copies of everything. We need those files." Marcus waited until they moved toward the garage before slipping away through the shadows. He had prepared for this, cached essential evidence in multiple locations, but they had escalated beyond what he expected. This was no longer just about property theft. His phone vibrated. Sarah's text made his blood run cold. "They broke into my apartment. Everything is gone." Marcus quickened his pace, keeping to back alleys and dark streets. The USB drive in his pocket felt like it was burning. Their backup evidence. Sarah's documents. Both copies were compromised. Dawn was breaking when Marcus reached Mrs. Rodriguez's house. She opened the door immediately to his knock, her face lined with worry. "Marcus, thank God. I heard noises from your house. I need to use your computer." Marcus said, following her inside. "And I need to call the police." "Already done," she replied. "I called as soon as I heard glass breaking." But Marcus, no police came. The implications hit him hard. They had enough influence to block police response. How deep did this corruption really go? Marcus booted up Mrs. Rodriguez's ancient desktop computer, praying it would be fast enough. He had minutes at most before they thought to check nearby houses. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed his cloud storage. The encrypted files were still there, but he could see multiple attempts had been made to breach the security. They were trying to erase everything. "Marcus!" Mrs. Rodriguez called softly from the window. "Black cars coming down the street." He initiated the transfer protocol his grandmother had designed, sending copies of all evidence to dozens of secure locations. Each file was split and encrypted differently, requiring multiple keys to access. Even if they found some, they could not stop everything. Headlights swept across the house. Marcus unplugged the computer just as pounding started at the front door. "Mrs. Rodriguez," a professional voice called. "This is the police. We need to speak with you." "Like hell you are," the old woman muttered, leading Marcus toward her back door. "My son was police for 30 years. Those are not real officers." They slipped out through her garden as the pounding grew louder. Marcus heard wood splintering as they forced their way in. Mrs. Rodriguez guided him through a gap in her fence into the neighboring yard. "Go," she whispered. "I will tell them you ran the other way. They will know you lied. I am too old to be afraid of thugs in fancy suits." She pressed her house key into his hand. "Be careful, mijo. Your grandmother would never forgive me if something happened to you." Marcus moved quickly through backyards and side streets, all too aware of vehicles prowling the neighborhood. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Court appearance in 3 hours. Choose wisely." They thought they had him trapped. With Sarah's evidence stolen and his home files compromised, they expected him to give up. But his grandmother had taught him to see patterns others missed, including patterns of human behavior. Every move they made revealed more about their organization. The fake police, the coordinated break-ins, the level of surveillance, all pointed to corruption far beyond what he initially suspected. This was not just about stealing properties. This was systematic abuse of power at multiple levels. Marcus found a 24-hour diner and slipped inside, ordering coffee to blend in. His phone could be tracked, but he needed it for one last task. He composed a message to every news outlet in the state, attaching select pieces of evidence with a simple note: "Court records showing judicial corruption. More evidence to follow. Watch today's proceedings in Judge Hampton's court." He powered down the phone and removed the battery. 3 hours until court. 3 hours to turn their desperate attack into his advantage. They thought stealing the evidence would save them. Instead, their actions would become part of the evidence itself. The diner's TV was tuned to morning news. Marcus watched as his message began to take effect. Reporters were already gathering outside the courthouse, drawn by promises of corruption evidence against a prominent judge. His coffee grew cold as he planned his next moves. They would expect him to either run or come to court empty-handed. But his grandmother had taught him that the most powerful moves often looked like mistakes to your opponent. Marcus gathered his thoughts, reviewing every detail of the past few hours. The pattern was clear now. All he had to do was make everyone else see it too. Dawn painted the sky pink as Marcus walked toward the courthouse. Police cars idled nearby, but these were real officers, drawn by the growing media presence. Camera crews set up their equipment as reporters speculated about the promised evidence of judicial corruption. Marcus straightened his tie, feeling his grandmother's presence in the familiar gesture. She had taught him that justice was not just about laws, but about patterns and truth. Today, everyone would see exactly what she had discovered. He climbed the courthouse steps, reporters calling questions he ignored. Inside, he could see Sarah at her clerk's desk, her face pale but determined. She gave him the slightest nod. They had not found everything. Judge Hampton's courtroom waited ahead, along with Whitman and his army of lawyers. They thought they had won already. Marcus allowed himself a door. The real game was just beginning. Marcus sat at his designated table in courtroom 7B, arranging his remaining documents with methodical precision. The gallery behind him was packed with reporters and spectators, drawn by his early early morning media blast. Richard Whitman and his legal team huddled at their table, casting suspicious glances his way. Judge Hampton entered, his face a mask of judicial authority. If he was concerned about the media presence, he showed no sign of it. Mr. Chen, I trust you are prepared to proceed without any further delays or unsubstantiated accusations. Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied, standing. Though I would like to address a relevant matter before we begin. Hampton waved his hand impatiently. Proceed. At approximately 3 a.m. this morning, several men broke into my home, destroying property and attempting to steal evidence related to this case. Marcus's voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. They also robbed the apartment of Sarah Martinez, a court clerk who had documented irregularities in cases involving Meridian Development. Whitman shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. These allegations are completely unfounded. Are they? Marcus pulled out his phone, playing the recording he had made during the break-in. Whitman's voice filled the courtroom, ordering his men to find the files. Hampton's gavel cracked against the bench. That recording is inadmissible. This court will not entertain illegally obtained evidence. Of course not, Your Honor, Marcus said smoothly. I merely wanted to establish context for what I'm about to present. He opened his laptop, connecting it to the courtroom's display system. The screen showed a complex web of property transfers, all connected to Meridian Development. Over the past 5 years, Meridian has acquired 37 properties through this court. In each case, the previous owner had supposedly transferred ownership months before their death or incapacitation. The documentation was always perfect, verified by one of 3 notaries who have since died in accidents. Marcus highlighted specific transactions on the screen. The pattern becomes clear when we overlay the city's development plans. Every property Meridian acquired through suspicious transfers sits on land slated for major redevelopment. Mr. Chen, Hampton interrupted, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, this speculation wastes the court's time. I have evidence, Your Honor, starting with the chemical analysis of the ink used in my grandmother's forged will. Marcus projected the lab results. This specific polymer was not manufactured until 3 months ago, yet it appears in documents supposedly signed last year. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Furthermore, Marcus continued, I have bank records showing payments from Meridian subsidiaries to offshore accounts linked to court officials. These payments coincide perfectly with favorable rulings in property disputes. Whitman stood again. Your Honor, these documents were stolen during a computer breach. They cannot be considered legitimate evidence. Actually, Mr. Whitman, these records came directly from Meridian's own servers. When you tried to hack my cloud storage last night, you left quite a trail. My grandmother's security protocols were designed to track any attempted intrusion and extract data from the source. Marcus projected new documents on the screen. Every attempt to breach my files created a backdoor into Meridian's system. The more desperately you tried to erase evidence, the more evidence you provided. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Hampton banged his gavel repeatedly, his face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. I'm holding you in contempt. Before you do, Your Honor, you might want to look at this. Marcus played another recording, this one showing Hampton himself accepting an envelope from a Meridian executive in his chambers. My grandmother installed cameras in her law office after the first break-in attempt. She knew they would come for her evidence eventually. 2 men in dark suits stood up in the gallery, displaying FBI badges. Judge William Hampton, you are under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Marcus watched as federal agents swarmed the courtroom, detaining Hampton, Whitman, and several Meridian executives. His chess gambit had worked perfectly. By allowing them to think they had stolen his evidence, he had provoked them into actions that only proved their guilt. Sarah appeared at his side, tears in her eyes. The FBI found everything they took from my apartment. They were keeping it as leverage against other witnesses. I know, Marcus said quietly. That was part of the plan. We needed them to gather all the evidence in one place. She stared at him. You let them steal it on purpose. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. Their desperation made them sloppy. Every move they made led to this moment. Reporters surrounded them, shouting questions about the investigation. Marcus gathered his documents calmly, remembering his grandmother's words about patterns and justice. Just one one statement, he told the press. This case was never about me or my home. It was about exposing a system that preyed on vulnerable people. My grandmother gave her life to uncover the truth. Today, we finished what she started outside the courthouse. Mrs. Rodriguez waited with tears in her eyes. She hugged Marcus tightly. Your grandmother would be so proud, mijo. Marcus looked up at the building where justice had finally been served. The game was over, but its impact would ripple through the legal system for years to come. His grandmother had taught him to see the patterns that others missed. Now everyone would see them too. The authorities had already begun reviewing every case touched by Hampton and Meridian. Families who had lost their homes would get justice. The corrupt system that had protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable was finally exposed. Marcus pulled his grandmother's chess queen from his pocket, remembering their final game. She had taught him that true justice, like chess, required patience, strategy, and the courage to make bold moves when necessary. Today, all those lessons had come together in a perfect checkmate. The death threats began arriving the morning after Judge Hampton's arrest. The first came by email, a carefully worded message suggesting Marcus should have an unfortunate accident before the grand jury convened. By afternoon, unmarked envelopes appeared at Mrs. Rodriguez's house, where Marcus had been staying since the break-in. Each contained photos of him walking to the courthouse, going to the library, meeting with Sarah. Marcus studied the photos at his grandmother's chess table, mapping the locations and times like moves in a game. The surveillance was professional, suggesting Hampton's network reached far beyond Meridian development. Sarah called while he was analyzing the pattern. Marcus, they are following me too. Black SUV outside my apartment all night. Have you contacted the FBI agents? They assigned a protection detail. But Marcus, these people have connections everywhere. Judge Hampton made 3 calls from holding before they caught him. Now witnesses are starting to recant their statements. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what they had unleashed. His grandmother had known the risks when she started investigating. Now he understood why she had been so careful with her evidence. We need to move everything we have to the federal prosecutors, he said. Not just the property records, all of it. What do you mean, all of it? My grandmother was not just investigating real estate fraud. She found connections to money laundering, judicial bribes, even links to organized crime. That is why they killed her when she got too close. Silence filled the line. Finally, Sarah spoke softly. How long have you known? Since I found her last chess game. She left moves on the board that looked like mistakes, but they were actually coordinates. Led me to records she had hidden about their entire operation. Marcus, that is why they are not just threatening you. They are terrified of what else you might know. A noise outside made Marcus move away from the windows. Meet me at the federal building in an hour. Bring everything you have. It is time to show all our cards. He hung up and gathered his files, including the encrypted drive his grandmother had hidden in the law book. The evidence it contained would expose corruption at every level of the city's power structure. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. More men watching the house, mijo? Black car at the corner? I know. Marcus checked his phone, confirming the FBI agent's text. They are not as subtle as they think. Your grandmother worried this would happen. That is why she made arrangements. Marcus looked up sharply. What arrangements? The old woman pulled an envelope from her apron pocket. She gave me this the week before she died. Said to wait until you were ready to finish what she started. Inside the envelope, Marcus found a key and an address. His grandmother's handwriting explained that she had prepared a safe house, stocked with everything he would need if things became dangerous. You knew about this all along? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled sadly. Eleanor trusted me to watch over you. Now go, before they realize what we are doing. Marcus hugged her tightly, knowing it might be the last time for a while. Thank you for everything. Just be careful. These people, they do not play by rules. That is their weakness, Marcus said, shouldering his backpack. They think breaking rules makes them strong, but my grandmother taught me that truth matter most. He slipped out through Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, using the route they had practiced. The surveillance team would be watching the street, not expecting him to emerge 2 blocks away. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. They are following me. Cannot make federal building. Marcus typed quickly. Go to secondary location. We'll meet you there. The safe house address led to an abandoned library branch on the edge of town. Marcus found the hidden entrance his grandmother had prepared, marveling at her forethought. Inside, he discovered a fully equipped command center with secure communications and backup power. Sarah arrived 30 minutes later, her her face pale but determined. 3 cars tried to box me in, lost them in the tunnel construction. Good, we need to work fast. Marcus booted up the secure computer system. Once we upload everything to the federal prosecutors, there is no going back. They will come after us with everything they have. They already are. Marcus projected his grandmother's final files onto the wall, but they do not know what we know. Every threat, every attack just proves the pattern she uncovered. Together, they began compiling the evidence that would blow the corruption wide open. Marcus thought of his grandmother as they worked, remembering her lessons about justice and courage. The game was deadlier now, but the principles remained the same. Outside, the city's power brokers plotted their next move, unaware that their own desperation was about to become their undoing. Marcus Chen had learned from the best how to turn an opponent's strength into weakness. Now it was time for the final gambit. The federal courthouse loomed against the morning sky as Marcus prepared for the final confrontation. Gone was the naive teenager they had mocked 2 months ago. In his place stood someone who had learned to turn threats into opportunities, fear into strategy. Inside the grand jury room, Marcus faced a panel of stern faces. These were not local officials who could be bought or threatened. The evidence he carried would reshape the city's power structure forever. Mr. Chen, the lead prosecutor began, we understand you have additional evidence regarding Judge Hampton's criminal enterprise. Marcus connected his laptop to the display system, bringing up his grandmother's complete investigation. What you have seen so far was just the surface. The property fraud scheme was a cover for something much larger. He projected a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Judge Hampton was not just bribes for property transfers. He was the legal front for a money laundering operation that stretched across 3 states. The prosecutors leaned forward as Marcus walked them through the evidence. Each document had been meticulously verified, each connection proven through multiple sources. His grandmother's thorough research left no room for doubt. Meridian Development was created specifically to legitimize illegal funds, Marcus explained. The property seizures provided cover for millions in criminal proceeds. Every time they stole a home, they were really washing money for their real clients. Sarah stepped forward, presenting her own records. The court documents show a clear pattern. Cases involving Meridian were always fast-tracked, with evidence favoring homeowners mysteriously vanishing from official files. The lead prosecutor studied the evidence carefully. This is far beyond what we initially suspected, but it also explains the level of resistance we have encountered. These people have powerful allies. We know, Marcus said quietly. They killed my grandmother when she got too close to exposing them. Now they are threatening everyone connected to the investigation. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with another warning message. The prosecutors exchanged glances, clearly concerned about the extent of the corruption they were uncovering. Mr. Chen, we will need you to testify before the full grand jury. Your direct knowledge of these events, combined with your grandmother's evidence, is crucial to securing indictments. Marcus nodded, remembering his grandmother's words about the importance of standing firm when justice demanded it. I will testify. But first, there is something else you need to see. He pulled up the final set of files, documents his grandmother had encoded in her last chess game. The evidence revealed connections between Hampton's operation and several prominent political figures. These records show systematic corruption at every level. Judges, politicians, business leaders, all profiting from a criminal enterprise hidden behind legitimate businesses. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. This was no longer just about one corrupt judge or stolen properties. This was about exposing a deeply rooted system of corruption that had infected the entire city, the prosecutor said gravely. Once we move forward, there is no going back. These people will use every resource they have to stop us. Marcus thought of the threats, the break-ins, the constant surveillance. They have already shown what they are willing to do, but my grandmother taught me that justice matters more than fear. The grand jury proceedings began that afternoon. Marcus testified for hours, laying out the complex web of corruption his grandmother had uncovered. Sarah provided supporting testimony about the court records, filling in crucial details about how the scheme operated. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as word spread about the expanding investigation. Marcus caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd, men who'd been following him for weeks. Let them watch. Every move they made only strengthened the case against them. The prosecutors worked methodically, building an airtight case that would be impossible to dismiss. Marcus's evidence evidence provided the foundation, but other witnesses began coming forward as the truth emerged. By evening, the first indictments were ready. The grand jury had seen enough to act against not just Hampton and Meridian's executives, but dozens of other conspirators. Marcus stood at the courthouse window, watching as federal agents moved to make the arrests. The chess game his grandmother had started was reaching its conclusion, but the final moves would be the most dangerous. They will make one last attempt to stop this, Sarah said, joining him at the window. Everything they have built is about to crumble. I know, Marcus replied. That is why we have to be ready for their desperation play. As if in response, his phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. A video showed Mrs. Rodriguez being forced into a black SUV. The game was not over yet. In fact, the most critical moves were still to come. Marcus Chen had learned from his grandmother that true justice required not just courage, but the wisdom to see the endgame before it arrived. The prosecutors quickly organized a protective detail, but Marcus knew the real solution would require something more subtle. His opponents had made their move. Now it was time to spring the trap they never saw coming. The burner phone rang exactly at midnight. Marcus answered to hear Richard Whitman's smooth voice, now edged with desperation. One simple trade, Mr. Chen. The woman for the evidence. Marcus kept his voice steady, though his hand gripped the phone tightly. Let me speak to her. The Mrs. Rodriguez's familiar voice came through, strong despite her situation. Do not give them anything, mijo. Your grandmother would never forgive us. A scuffle, then Whitman returned. You have 1 hour. Come to the abandoned Meridian construction. A site. Alone, Marcus ended the call, turning to the FBI agents monitoring the conversation. Did you get the location? Or signal traced and teams are moving into position, the lead agent confirmed. But Chen, this is too risky. Let us handle the exchange. They will kill her if they spot law enforcement, Marcus said, pulling up blueprints of the construction site on his laptop. We need to play this exactly right. Sarah studied the plans over his shoulder. The old subway tunnels run directly beneath that site. They never finished sealing them when the project stalled. Perfect. Marcus highlighted specific access points. They will expect me to come from street level, but my grandmother taught me to always look for moves your opponent cannot see. The FBI tactical team leader spread out a surveillance map. We have thermal imaging showing 6 armed men inside the building. They have your friend on the top floor. Marcus nodded, seeing the pattern emerge. They chose that location for visibility. They will be watching every approach. See, which is why we attack from below, Sarah said, understanding his strategy. The tunnels give us complete access without exposing our position. The next 40 minutes were a blur of preparation. Marcus memorized the tunnel layout while FBI teams moved into position. His grandmother's chess lessons guided every decision. Position before action. Control the center. Always have a counter prepared. At the construction site, Marcus approached the main entrance exactly as expected. Floodlights snapped on, illuminating him from multiple angles. That is far enough, Whitman called from the darkness. Where is the evidence? Marcus held up a laptop bag. Release Mrs. Rodriguez first. Do not be naive, boy. Slide the bag over here. If anything happens to her, every news outlet in the country gets the complete files. My death only guarantees your exposure. Below ground, FBI teams were moving through the tunnels, guided by Sarah's coordination. The thermal imaging showed the hostage takers completely focused on Marcus. Enough games, Whitman snapped. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes far beyond one judge. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Marcus replied calmly. Money laundering, judicial corruption, organized crime connections. My grandmother mapped your entire operation before you killed her. A long silence followed. When Whitman spoke again, all pretense was gone. Your grandmother was warned. She chose not to listen. No, she chose to fight, just like I am choosing now. The first explosion rocked the building's foundation. FBI teams breached through the tunnel access points as confused gunmen tried to respond to threats from below. Marcus ducked behind a concrete barrier as chaos erupted above. The carefully planned operation took less than 2 minutes. When the dust settled, Mrs. Rodriguez was safe and Whitman's men were in custody. You ever play chess, Mr. Whitman? Marcus asked as agents led the lawyer away in handcuffs. My grandmother taught me that the best moves are the ones your opponent never sees coming. Dawn dawn painted the sky red as Marcus helped Mrs. Rodriguez into an ambulance for precautionary checks. She gripped his hand tightly. "Your grandmother would be so proud, mijo. You finished what she started." "We all did," Marcus said, watching as FBI teams gathered evidence from the site. "She taught me that justice takes more than one person. It takes everyone choosing to stand up when it matters." The next few days brought a wave of arrests as the full scope of the corruption was exposed. Judge Hampton's network crumbled as conspirators rushed to make deals. The evidence Marcus and his grandmother had gathered proved unassailable. Sarah coordinated with federal prosecutors, ensuring every document was properly logged and preserved. The pattern of corruption his grandmother had uncovered would be impossible to hide now. Marcus stood in the library of their Victorian home, now returned to its rightful ownership. The chess table where he had learned strategy from his grandmother remained untouched, pieces still arranged from their final game. He picked up the White Queen, remembering her lessons about justice and courage. The game she had started was finally reaching its conclusion, but its impact would reshape the city for years to come. Families who had lost their homes to Hampton's schemes were being contacted. Properties would be returned, restitution paid from seized assets. The corrupt system that had protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable was being dismantled. Piece by piece, Mrs. Rodriguez joined him in the library, carrying a familiar leather-bound law book. "Found this while cleaning. Your grandmother would want you to have it." Marcus opened the book carefully. Inside, he found a handwritten note he had never seen before. His grandmother's final message, saved for when it would mean the most. "Justice is not just about laws, my dear Marcus. It is about seeing the patterns others miss and having the courage to act when those patterns reveal truth. You have always seen things others overlook. Use that gift wisely. With all my love, grandmother." Marcus placed the note carefully in his pocket, next to the chess queen. The game might be over, but its lessons would guide him forever. His grandmother had taught him to see justice as a pattern waiting to be revealed. Now, everyone could see it too. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as families gathered to reclaim what had been stolen from them. Marcus stood quietly at the back of the room, watching as years of injustice were finally set right. Each property deed returned. Each restitution check presented represented a small piece of the pattern his grandmother had worked so hard to expose. Sarah coordinated with federal officials, ensuring every claim was properly processed. The scope of Hampton's corruption had touched hundreds of lives, but now each victim would receive justice. "The Anderson family is here," Sarah told Marcus, gesturing to an elderly couple near the front. Their home was one of the first properties Meridian seized. "Mrs. Anderson said your grandmother helped them file appeals before she died." Marcus approached the couple carefully. Mrs. Anderson's eyes filled with tears when she saw him. "You looked just like Eleanor described you. She was so proud of your mind, the way you could see connections others missed. She never stopped fighting for your case," Marcus said softly. "Everything she discovered started with trying to help your family." Mr. Anderson gripped his hand firmly. "What you did, finishing her work, it gave all of us hope again. These homes are not just buildings. They are our lives, our memories." Throughout the day, similar scenes repeated as more families came forward. Some had lost everything to Hampton schemes. Others had been forced into settlements, threatened into silence. Now they could finally speak the truth. The prosecutors had worked diligently to trace every fraudulent transaction. Meridian's assets were seized. The corrupt network that had seemed untouchable just months ago lay in ruins. Marcus received an unexpected visit from the State Bar Association. They had reviewed his handling of the case and made an unprecedented offer. If he completed his high school requirements, they would grant him early admission to law school. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Sarah said when he told her the news. "She always said you had a natural gift for law." "I had a great teacher," Marcus replied, thinking of all the lessons learned over their chess games. "She showed me that justice is not just about knowing the rules. It is about understanding why they matter." The media attention brought other cases to light. Families from across the state contacted Marcus, sharing stories of suspicious property transfers and corrupt judges. The pattern his grandmother had uncovered went far beyond one city. He established a foundation in her name, dedicated to helping victims of judicial corruption. The Eleanor Chen Justice Initiative would ensure her legacy lived on, fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. Mrs. Rodriguez insisted on serving on the foundation's board, board. Your grandmother would want us to continue her work. There are still many people who need help seeing the truth. The Foundation's first case involved another teenager fighting to save her family's restaurant from a suspiciously similar development scheme. Marcus recognized the pattern immediately and took the case pro bono. Principal Stevens visited as Marcus prepared for the hearing. "I wish you would reconsider returning to school. Your education matters." "This is my education," Marcus explained, showing him the case files. "Every time we help another family, I learn more about justice than any classroom could teach." The principal studied the documents thoughtfully. "Your grandmother taught constitutional law for 30 years. She would understand choosing this path." Marcus's reputation grew as more cases succeeded. Other lawyers sought his insight, amazed by his ability to spot patterns they had missed. But he never forgot the lessons learned over that chessboard, the importance of seeing beyond the obvious moves. Sarah remained his closest ally, coordinating the Foundation's expanding caseload. Together, they built a network of advocates dedicated to exposing corruption wherever it appeared. The chess table still stood in his grandmother's library. Now, the Foundation's headquarters. New pieces had replaced the old ones, but Marcus kept the white queen that had guided their final game. It reminded him that justice, like chess, required both strategy and heart. 1 year after Hampton's arrest, Marcus stood before the state Supreme Court, arguing his first major appeal. The justices listened intently as he outlined another pattern of corruption, his grandmother's teachings evident in every carefully constructed argument. The Foundation's work had helped restore faith in the legal system. Each case they won showed that justice was possible, even against powerful opponents. The pattern of truth could not be hidden once people learned to see it. Mrs. Rodriguez still brought him dinner during late nights at the office, making sure he did not lose himself entirely in the work. "Your grandmother would be proud of what you have built, mijo, but she would also want you to remember to live." Marcus took her advice, balancing the Foundation's cases with his law studies. The early admission offer had come with a flexible schedule, allowing him to continue fighting for justice while preparing for his future role. The media called him a prodigy, amazed that someone so young could understand complex legal strategies. But Marcus knew the truth. His gift came from years of chess games with his grandmother, learning to see the patterns that others missed. Each victory brought more cases, more families seeking help. The Foundation grew, adding staff and resources, but Marcus insisted on maintaining its core mission. They would fight for those who had no other voice, just as his grandmother had taught him. The chess queen remained on his desk, a constant reminder of where it all began. Justice was not just about winning cases, it was about seeing the truth and having the courage to act on it. His grandmother's final lesson lived on through every family helped, every wrong set right. The pattern of justice she had revealed would continue to grow, guided by the principles she had taught over countless games of chess. Marcus knelt before his grandmother's grave, carefully placing the white queen against the polished stone. The morning dew sparkled on fresh flowers, a reminder that others still came to pay their respects to Eleanor Chen. "We did it, grandmother," he said softly. "Everything you uncovered, every pattern you found, it all led to justice in the end." Behind him, Sarah approached quietly, holding a thick case file. "But I thought you should see this right away." Marcus stood, brushing grass from his knees. "Another property case? Different pattern, same results. Senior judge in Hartford suddenly retiring after a series of unusual rulings, all benefiting the same development company." He took the file, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. The familiar signs were there, hidden beneath layers of legal complexity. Someone else had learned from Hampton's mistakes, trying to hide their corruption more carefully. "They think changing the pattern makes it invisible," Marcus said, closing the file. "But you taught me to look deeper, grandmother. The truth always leaves traces for those who know where to find them." Sarah smiled softly. "You still talk to her like she can hear you." "She can. Every time we expose another corrupt judge, every time we help another family keep their home, her lessons guide us." Dallas. They walked together through the quiet cemetery, discussing the new case. The Eleanor Chen Justice Initiative had grown beyond anything Marcus had imagined, but its core mission remained unchanged. The Hartford case will be complicated, Sarah warned. These people learned from Hampton's downfall. They are hiding their tracks better. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing her a familiar chess program. Grandmother always said the best players think they are invisible, but every move leaves a pattern if you know how to see it. At the Foundation's offices, Mrs. Rodriguez waited with fresh coffee and her knowing smile. "Another case, mijo? Another pattern to uncover," Marcus replied, setting up his laptop. "Will you join the strategy meeting?" The old woman nodded, taking her place at the conference table. She had become an invaluable part of their team, her instincts for truth as sharp as ever. As Marcus outlined the Hartford situation, he felt his grandmother's presence in the familiar routine. Each case was a new game, but the principles remained the same. See the pattern, understand the strategy, move with purpose. The White Queen sat on his desk, a constant reminder of where it all began. Justice was not just about winning cases, it was about seeing the truth and having the courage to act on it. His phone buzzed with messages from other attorneys seeking guidance. The Foundation's reputation had spread, drawing those who recognized that fighting corruption required more than just legal knowledge. Marcus worked late into the evening, mapping connections and tracing documents. The Hartford case would be challenging, but his grandmother had taught him that the most important games often were. Sarah brought him dinner, insisting he take a break. "You know what Eleanor would say about working too hard. She would remind me that chess requires both focus and rest," Marcus admitted, accepting the food, "and that justice is a marathon, not a sprint." They ate together, discussing strategy and next moves. The Foundation's work never really ended, but each victory brought them closer to the world his grandmother had envisioned. As night fell, Marcus returned to his work with renewed energy. The patterns were becoming clearer, revealing another web of corruption waiting to be exposed. His grandmother's voice seemed to whisper from the chess queen on his desk, "Remember, Marcus, the quiet moves are often the most powerful." He smiled, understanding as always what she had tried to teach him. Justice was not about making noise. It was about seeing truth and acting with purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patterns to uncover. But tonight, Marcus Chen sat in his grandmother's library, surrounded by the books and memories that had shaped him, ready for whatever. Game came next. The pieces were already in motion. All he had to do was see the pattern and make his move.